Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Pitt Season 1 Episode 3. It's simply called 9 AM. Spoilers for the episode as always, and this is a Patreon sponsor review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. So, yeah, there's an interesting bookend to this episode. Now, obviously, this still feels like an episode of the Pit. There's a lot of chaos going on. There's a lot of, juggling all the things that are happening around, following Robbie around as he's kind of helping put out various fires and so on. But the bookend of this episode, which I would say most of the plot lines in this episode are mostly finishing off plot lines that were in the last episode, some of which started even maybe during the first episode. And because the ending point of this episode is the brother and sister character who finally agree to take the father, their dying father, off life support, because all it's doing is making him more uncomfortable. And it's, the brother's kind of already on board with it, but the sister is still kind of clinging to this idea of we're not going to take him off the life support. So the episode ends with her finally saying okay and breaking down in tears, and that's what we cut to black on. And I thought the bookend to this episode is that the start of it is also about accepting that someone is gone. In fact, it's a theme throughout the whole episode, and I imagine it's going to be a theme throughout the show in general, given that it's a hospital ER style show where there's people constantly in surgery and things like that. But the last episode ended with Whittaker not letting go of the idea that he could bring back the old man that had died suddenly under his care. And this episode starts with him doing the compressions, and he's still going, and he's still kind of insisting that they go through the last stages that he's been told he's allowed to do, even though every single person there is already kind of accepted that this guy's gone. But this is Whittaker's first patient that he's losing, so he's determined to try and stop it. And we even follow Robbie go do a couple of things and come back, and he's still there doing the compressions. So the episode starts with this idea of Whittaker not wanting to accept that this patient is gone and feeling some sense of guilt that he is gone. And then the through line throughout the whole episode is that Robbie is dealing with this brother and sister and trying to kind of explain to them that all they're doing is putting their father through turmoil and pain by keeping him alive and all this stuff, and that there's more problems occurring, and they'll have to do more invasive things that'll make him even more uncomfortable and might risk even bigger problems with organ failure and things like that. So he's dealing with patients that can't accept it. He's dealing with a young doctor who's learning, who's not really there to accept it yet. So those thematically tie together very nicely. And then on top of all that, we also have the parents of the 18-year-old who OD'd and is brain dead. And we already knew last episode that he was a goner. He is gone. But Robbie had promised some extra tests just to try and give the parents some time to process it and come to terms and accept that their son is dead. And that was intentionally a stalling tactic on his part. So that also feeds into this. And then on top of all that, there's also a patient that died in the previous shift, and the head doctor had left a letter for the next of kin. The sister of this man comes in. I actually thought it was the guy that fell in the train tracks, helping the other woman because of the burns on the face at first. But this was clearly from the previous shift because it was the other doctor who'd left this letter. And the sister asked Robbie to read it, and he asked to read this, letter about apologizing that he wished he could save his life, and says some nice things about him as much as he can. Which is also a similar thing that happens with the Whittaker patient, where they stand around, give a moment of silence, and they let Whittaker say a couple of words, and he only knows a couple of things about him really, but he says those things, and they kind of give him a little send off. But notably, again, there's a couple of characters who clearly aren't emotionally as affected and are kind of just look almost annoyed that they have to go through this part of the process. Santos being the one who kind of rolls her eyes a little bit when they're doing the moment of silence. So, we're still kind of establishing the various characters, and I feel like Santos is very much the young version of Langdon. They share a lot of attitude kind of similarities, I think. But like I say, there's definitely a solid through line throughout this episode that's about accepting that someone is gone. It's about accepting either from the doctor's side of losing a patient, the next of kin side of accepting your loved one's gone, and you've got Robbie in the center of it trying to kind of juggle all these different people accepting and dealing with the loss of someone. And it means something different to each of them, of course. And like everyone who talks to Whitaker about it, he like kind of tells him, one, it wasn't his fault. No one would have caught this. This was like a 1 in 100 chance that he was going to have some kind of heart attack or cardiac event that was going to kill him. But that doesn't make him feel better. It's actually Santos, interestingly enough, the one who seemed the most kind of indifferent to the humanity of it all. She's the one who eventually says the right thing to him, I think, that kind of gives him some sense, well, not even closure, but she says that, hey, you're kind of lucky. Your first patient that you lost was not because it was your fault. Not everyone gets to say that. And it's even maybe implying there she's already lost a patient in one of her other, trainee positions. And it's interesting because like they talk. There's a whole conversation that Robbie has with someone else. I can't remember who, but he's talking about how there's a constant fear of making mistakes. Like, and that happens. Oh, I remember who it is. It's Samira, because Samira he's grilling her a little bit for taking too much time with each patient. And he's wondering, like, are you worried about making a mistake? And she's like, of course I am, but that's not why I take so much time. She's kind of like, she's really into like the way he puts it is that, hey, maybe you should be a therapist instead, because she spends so much time with the patients after they're kind of cleared, right? She's making them feel better. She's going through things with them. And obviously that's good for the patient to get all this extra support and maybe helps them through a little bit extra than above and beyond. But the thing about the ER is that they're supposed to be going through as many patients as possible, and that by staying with some patients too long, the one she had last episode with the opium thing, she's maybe, damning other people who are waiting to be seen, like other people who could be getting help right now because she's spending too much time. So they have a little bit of a debate about that. I think this was probably the most character building that Samira's had so far. This idea that people call her slow-mo behind her back because she's like the slowest when it comes to the patients. So I think that's an interesting little bit for her. Because there's definitely some characters that we're focused on more. Robbie primarily. And I think, Mackay's had some focus as well because of the whole ankle bracelet thing. There's not too much follow-up in this episode. There's a little bit of Javadi asking kind of slyly, I think it's Langdon she's talking to, where she's like, hey, do you know much about Mackay and what she was like before this? And she's basically trying to dig a little bit. And she doesn't really get any answers. Langdon's like, she's pretty private. I know she's got a son, and doesn't really offer anything. One of the weird things I kind of liked, actually, and this is like a strange thing to say I liked, but Cassie Mackay, right? I'll keep calling her Mackay, but her first name's Cassie. Mackay at one point says she has to go do something and says, hey, Javadi, can you go deal with a couple things on your own? I genuinely liked that Mackay just disappeared from the episode for like, I don't know, like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Like, we don't see her again for some time. And it really suggests that she did go off and do something, maybe, it may not have even been anything serious. She might have been taking a massive dump that just took 20 minutes, but she's missing for that period of time, and she's just not around. Which reminds me, there's also like a running bit at one point in this episode where Robbie's trying to go for a piss, and he keeps getting interrupted. And the thing that he's asked for when he gets to the urinal finally is so time sensitive that he has to just go and leave. So even by the end of the episode, he's reading this sad letter out. He's, convinced these people that their dad should be left to die, and he's still not pissed. The quest for the piss is kind of what this episode is in a lot of ways. So, no, I think that's interesting. There's a little bit of a follow-up, though, that kind of maybe hints at some of maybe Mackay's past, where we bring back in the dangerous teenager that ran off in episode 1, where the mother's still concerned. There's not too much of that this episode, but we get a little follow-up on it. The social worker's been talking to her, and Robbie is now concerned because the kid didn't go to school, he's not came back, and he's like, hey, do you remember the names of the girls? And maybe we can, tell certain people to be on guard or be in a safe place or whatever. He doesn't say that out loud, but that's kind of like what he's maybe hinting at. And there's an interesting interaction between him and Mackay. This is kind of where Mackay comes back into the episode, where Mackay says, hey, is there a follow-up on that teenager? And that's not, she actually calls him something else. I didn't actually quite catch what she said, but I assume it was something that was kind of damning, like calling him a shooter or something like that. because Robbie kind of said, "Hey, don't call him that," when she came in, but I didn't quite hear what she said. But he says, "No, I was kind of hoping he'd come back when the mum called him. He didn't show up to school." And Mackay gets kind of serious when Robbie says, "Look, I just don't want to ruin this kid's life by like calling the police and like, you know, putting him through this if he's not done anything yet." And Mackay kind of like, you know, doesn't let him away with that explanation, gets in front of him. And it's not like super confrontational. She's not angry at him or anything. But she does let out something about her past where she says, "Hey, I've been on the other side of someone who hates women, and don't let these other lives be ruined. Like they're more important in this situation than his is if he's the dangerous one," kind of thing. And it was just a little hint. Now, why she would have like an ankle bracelet on for being a victim of something like that, you know, obviously there must be more to the story than that. But I feel like there's probably some connection between why she's not under house arrest, but she's got the ankle bracelet on, and why, like, you know, that this part of her past where she's maybe a victim of domestic abuse or something like that, right? Was she, you know, maybe, you know, like forced to do something illegal, right? And that's maybe why she's been allowed to kind of still function and work and so on, but, you know, under this, you know, one restriction of like the location being kind of like held down tight, or, you know, whatever it is. But it definitely was an interesting little wrinkle for them to throw in at that point. So it's a sort of thing where, like, sometimes, like, now I'm 3 episodes in, I'm getting kind of used to the show, and there's definitely still a lot of like stuff going on, and there's definitely little cases that I'm probably never going to like remember to bring up because they're ultimately not that important in the grand scheme of things. They might thematically relate to stuff a little bit, but like like I think the start of every episode is almost always got me kind of spiraling, where I'm like, oh god, how am I going to keep track of all this? And there's this patient, and there's that patient. At one point in this episode, there's like, surgery being done. There's a guy that's just had a heart attack, and we learn that they can reverse it as long as they get him to this stage of the process by 51 minutes. So they've got that time to balloon, they called it. There's a guy who comes in with a nail in his chest, which has penetrated his heart. So they're doing like basically open heart surgery on him and dealing with that. And that sounds like a big part of the episode, but it's not. It's actually a really minor part of the episode, all things considered. If anything, it's mostly played for comedy because the guy's kind of foul-mouthed and yelling, "Get this effing nail out my chest," and making several demands and so on. You know. And speaking of comedy, there's a couple other things that happen. The rats are still an issue, and it turns out Collins is definitely scared of rats. So she's like on top of a bed at one point with a broom trying to fend off potential rats. And there's a little bit more back and forth with her and Robbie. The Napoli woman can tell she's pregnant, and that makes her a little like weirdly uncomfortable when she's talking to her. They've got a translator up on Skype, basically. There's these little things sprinkled throughout, and I don't necessarily have a ton to say about all of them. Like, obviously, they're all kind of adding to the ongoing story of these characters, but like, there's a lot to juggle, and there's kind of like the main things that sort of stick out of an episode, which is kind of where I start with and focus on as I'm talking about it. And because this is kind of different to a lot of other shows I've reviewed. I've not really done a show like this before. I'm finding my way still about how I actually approach discussing it, because I can't really talk about every little detail, and I'm not even sure it would be valuable if I did. Like, if I sat and like made a point of like noting down every single scene, every single little medical thing they talk about, I would just be listing everything in the episode, and I don't think that would really be of value to anyone. So, you know, I'm still kind of wrestling with that a little bit, and like sort of like, you know, what am I focusing on when I'm discussing things and so on. Because, you know, there's a few other cases. This is a more comedy with Whitaker. They do a whole thing with him where he takes a really simple case. You know, he's kind of staring at the spreadsheet of like all the people waiting for a doctor, and he takes a simple one, and he basically needs like this liquid for the patient to drink, and he goes to the cabinet to get it. And he's supposed to shake it, and he goes to shake it, but before he's warned to make sure the cap's on tight, it just spills all over his scrubs. He's completely covered, and there's basically a little comedy bit where when he's trying to get some new scrubs, I actually kind of like this, just from like a learning about how hospitals work kind of thing, or how an ER kind of works. I don't know if it's like this at every hospital or maybe different in different countries, obviously, but they've got like a machine where if they put in their old scrubs, they get a new set out, but they have to put the old ones in first, which leads to the comedy here because he has to go and put on like a patient's hospital gown so he's not naked or in his underwear as he's swapping them out. That was just interesting to see. I was also really noticing this episode that obviously they've got the disposable gloves that they put on when they're working with different patients, and they always take them off after. I've noticed them taking them off constantly, and even putting them on in the past episodes. I think this was the first time I noticed though that the boxes of gloves are just scattered everywhere. Like they've just got them at every single every surface that can have a box of blue gloves on them. There's a box of them. Because the doctors are constantly grabbing them and needing them. Even if they don't need them right now, they grab a couple and put them in their pocket so that they've got a pair at the ready when someone comes in and they need to have the gloves. So those are the weird little details that I was kind of enjoying, just kind of picking up on. That I'm getting kind of used to the atmosphere a little bit and noticing the churn and the turnover of everything happening. So that stuff's there. There's a little bit more bonding between some of the characters, or getting to know between some of the characters. Namely Javadi and Santos, where Santos says, "Hey, we're buddies now," and it leads to a very awkward fist bump. And she's still calling her Crash, but she's trying to be nice about it. And that also leads to another scene where she gets to sit and talk to King a little bit. That's Santos and King, and that's a little bit different as well because Santos. Like, they bring up that Javadi's mum works in the hospital upstairs, and King thinks that sounds fun. That must be great. And Santos like, no, I hate the idea of my mother working anywhere near me. That sounds horrible. But then King reveals that her mother's been dead for a while. So it's, we're learning about the characters and kind of the different attitudes. I kind of appreciate that Santos doesn't work near her mother. In fact, to be honest, it kind of feels like Javadi doesn't really want to work near her mother, given how awkward she felt when she was interacting with her in the previous episode. So, kind of a weird situation, especially when it's such a high demanding, high pressure job with lots of potential for critique, one might say. That stuff's interesting too. So I think it's doing a good job of juggling things. The other big plot line that I've not really mentioned too much yet, just to go back to the teenager that OD'd now. So obviously we have the slow kind of the parents realizing that there's nothing that can be done, that their son is brain dead. Now that's playing out throughout the episode, and it's kind of weighing on Robbie, and we see the dad kind of go up to the charge nurse, Dana, and say, hey, my son's dead, isn't he? He kind of gets to that realization first, and she's kind of hey, I'm not a doctor, I can't answer that, but she's nice to him and whatever, tries to comfort him. But this is where we get a little bit of a reveal. Well, reveal is maybe a strong word, but earlier in the episode, it was Mackay who was the doctor who sort of brought this patient in, but there was a girl came in with her friend who she couldn't wake up, right? About 18 years old. And very quickly they wake her up, they give her something to get her up, and they're asking if she took something because she must have took something. It turns out she says she took half a Xanax, and they're like, hey, that's not nothing, that's a big deal. And if you're getting stuff, that's not prescribed, if you're getting stuff, on the streets, as it were, it's dangerous for various reasons, and this was a close call. She's okay, and they say she's going to be okay quite quickly. They do a couple of things and it's fine, but when some of her friends and family come to see her, the dad of the other teenager who's died recognizes some of the kids, and it leads to a scene where he comes charging into this girl's room demanding to know if she gave his son the drugs, and starts yelling, you killed my son, and gets angry to the point where they have to call security. This is the second episode in a row where the hospital security's been very important, because they basically drag him away as he's yelling at her. I think I like this sequence. It's a little coincidental in some ways that they're both there at the same time to an extent, but also not really, because it makes sense that if they both knew each other, they both got these pills at the same time. Obviously, he was much more unlucky. Maybe he took more than she did, and that's why he's, had a much more severe reaction. Maybe it's just a bit of luck. Whatever the case, it makes sense that, they both took them at similar times. They both end up in the hospital in the same day, right? Couple hours apart. Makes complete sense. But what I liked about this is that at first she's quite defensive and says, hey, he gave them to me. And that may be true. Like, I don't necessarily think she's lying there necessarily. I mean, maybe she could be. It doesn't really matter all that much, though. But I think the seriousness of what happened, because the friend who brought her in is quite scared. But when she wakes up, she's kind of like, wait, why am I here? What's going on? She's not really wanting to admit she took anything at first. And the severity of what happened is kind of like not quite hit her. And, like the doctor at one point says to her, hey, like, tell your friends, like, you ended up in hospital. Like, tell everyone at the goddamn college you're going to that, this stuff is dangerous and, people are going to end up here. And she kind of, she agrees to that. She's not like a little shithead about it or anything. But once this scene happens where this dad comes in and starts yelling, you killed my son, you killed my son. And they all know who this son is, right? Because, what the one teenager recognizes him and says, hey, that's so-and-so's dad. And I think this moment of him yelling, you killed my son, even if that's not technically true, even if she never gave him anything, the severity of like how serious this is and the fact that she did not die. Like, the realization that someone she knew who took the same thing has died and she didn't. I think that moment of hitting her smack in the face is really effective in this scene. I think the guest star, who, is only in a few scenes, I think she does a good job. I think the dad does a good job. And I think it sells this idea that she was taking it seriously at this point. I don't think she was like laughing it off or anything like that. But I think just how serious it is only just hits her in that moment. And they are all dead quiet as that dad has been dragged away. Like, they have nothing to say in defense or anything. So, yeah, big learning moment. It's funny because I think this probably gets this and the just the story of the parents like having to finally accept their son is dead. Definitely, I would say maybe gets the most runtime, or at least it gets more runtime compared to the brother and sister and their dad that needs to be taken off life support. But that's the one we choose to end on, and maybe it's just because it makes more sense to end on that, given like how the things have to play out, rather than because it's the more impactful ending. Because I would say this is the most impactful scene. If I had to pick a scene of the episode, it's this dad yelling at this girl, you killed my son. And again, not because I think he's accurate. Like, I get that he's just upset, he's looking for someone to blame, so on and so on, but it's just the reality of what they were all involved in, what they were close to, what she was close to doing, all just hitting them, I think works really well. And it's probably my favorite scene of the episode by a fair stretch. So no. But yeah, I think that'll probably do me for this episode. Someone steals an ambulance. That was the thing. I don't know if it's actually like, I was unclear in the scene if it was actually stolen by just random civilians or if other paramedics just took it because it was there to be used, and the the paramedics that were supposed to be taking it are just pissed that someone else from the hospital took it. I was unclear, right? It didn't feel like the reaction was strong enough for it to be, oh, some criminal just took my ambulance. It felt like the reaction might be stronger for that, which is why I'm thinking it's just other paramedics took it, and they're just kind of, waiting. They have to wait to get another ambulance now, basically. It's a bit of a jump scare though, because the one paramedic lady gets like hit in the arm by the ambulance as it drives out. So I thought that was like a little jumpy. Anyway, that's my thoughts on episode 3 of The Pitt. I will say, looking ahead on IMDb, not that I'll read descriptions or anything like that, I keep spoiler free, but I can't help but notice that the ratings for the episodes, which are all pretty high in general, they're notably on average very high for the back half of the season, which is interesting. I mean, in theory, that should be how it works. It should be more better. You should be more invested in things, and things should be paying off in ways that they really click when you get later in a season if it's well written. So hopefully I feel that way. It would be nice to feel that way. So here's hoping. But yeah, that was my thoughts on The Pitt, episode 3. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. Of course, you can support the channel over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or by becoming a YouTube member. Either is perfectly valid. Although if you go to Patreon, you'll get all the bonus stuff from the movie channel as well. Check out the movie podcast over there, MailFuzz Movies. But that's me. So thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?